In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a calculated field in a pivot table, in an existing pivot table. So in front of me, I have a pivot table. This pivot table represents real estate data. It was built on real estate data. I have several agents, Carter, Fisher, Rios, Travis, and each one of those agents have sold numerous properties in various cities across Arizona. And this pivot table shows you total sales for each agent by each city. And if you notice in my workbook, I have the underlying data sheet that this pivot table was built on a different worksheet. So now I'm back at my pivot table. Notice I have my pivot table fields in the panel on the right, and I have the quadrants for building my pivot table on the right as well. And this time I'm going to actually create a calculated field because I want to know percent of asking price, and that wasn't one of the fields that was present in my data set. So I'm going to create that on the fly using what's called a calculated field. So the first thing I want to do with my example is I want to uncheck selling price because selling price was used to calculate sales total. And I don't want to use that anymore. I want to replace that. So I'm going to uncheck it and it'll be removed from the values quadrant. And notice now I don't have any numeric values in my pivot table. And then in order to create my calculated field, I'm going to make sure that the pivot table tools ribbon is selected. And I'm going to click the Analyze tab. And in the a little bit right of center, you should see a group that's called Calculations, and I'm going to click the drop-down arrow next to Fields, Items, and Sets, and I'm going to select Calculated Field because that's what I want to create. The calculated field that I want to create is I want to see what the selling price was as a percent of the asking price. So I'm going to call my field percent of asking price. So I want to know if something was, its asking price was $750,000. How close was the selling price to that asking price? So I have my name, and now in the formula box, I'm going to leave the equal sign and I'm going to remove that 0. And now I'm going to actually select the fields that I want to use in my calculation. So my numerator needs to be selling price, so I'm going to double click on selling price. Then I'm going to type a divided by symbol, and my asking price needs to be my denominator, so I'm going to double click on asking price. Then I'm going to hit OK. Notice Excel immediately puts it in a pivot table, my pivot table fields list. And it checks it and includes it in the values quadrant because it assumes that if I went through the trouble of creating the calculated field, I probably want to see it on my pivot table. Notice it is in the pivot table, however, it's a percent and it's being shown as dollar values, so that doesn't make much sense. We need to go in and actually customize that. So I'm going to click on the drop-down arrow in the values quadrant next to what's being defaulted as sum of percent of asking price. And I'm going to select value field settings. Now, my aggregation methods are at the bottom and it doesn't make sense to sum a percentage. So I'm going to take the average of the percentages. And I'm going to come up with a little simpler name here. I'm going to give it a custom name of AVG percent of asking price. Then I'm going to go into number format and I'm going to click on percentage as my category type, and then I'm going to show 2 decimal places. I'm going to hit OK twice, and then now see how this field has been included in my pivot table. It is showing as a percentage, and it is the percent of asking price, which is what I decided to name this. So as you can see, it's very easy to create a calculated field and to embellish or enhance a pivot table with a field that doesn't even exist in your data set. So remember, pivot tables are a great tool to use to categorize, aggregate, and analyze a large data set. And if a field isn't present in the data, but the building blocks are, you can actually create a calculated field to include in your pivot table.